Thank you, Eamon. So it's lovely to be here. Usually the launch of any kind of academic report is very dry, so it looks like a really creative morning. I've enjoyed the wee group and I've enjoyed the poetry reading, so I'm looking forward to the rest of it. My name's Lorna Montgomery. I'm a lecturer in social work at Queen's, and it has been a delightful experience working with Engage with Age in this project and with Eamon. So really enjoyed it. I've taken the lead in the project. I'm just going to give a little summary of it, and then I think throughout the morning we're going to say a little more about it. I mean, as the Commissioner has already said, it's a very timely report. I've just stuck up there some headlines that I've taken really over the last few weeks and months around the impact of loneliness. This report hopes in part to think about how do we engage people who are lonely and isolated. What can we learn from this project which will help us to understand the best way to engage isolated and lonely older people. And as the Commissioner said, you know, the isolation and loneliness is considered a hidden epidemic with very significant consequences to health and well-being. Probably as a result of that, in 2012, I think, Margie, who's here, initiated the HOPE programme, which was basically an initiative to think about gathering opportunities for isolated and lonely people to meet together and utilising housing associations and developing hubs for people to attend in housing associations. So residents and individuals formed a community. I think they met weekly, and an essential part of that was recruiting volunteers to get involved in the hubs and work with individuals who were isolated and lonely. Probably very innovatively, Margie and the hubs engaged with Queen's to conduct a formal evaluation of the project each year, and one of my colleagues was involved with that. You've probably had some feedback from that already, but I suppose the important thing to say was that that evaluation was very significant and very positive, and it was considered that the HOPE programme was proactive in engaging older people and in preventing social isolation. I think there were 200 participants in the programme, and it was seen to be important in increasing confidence and well-being. So I came along at the end of that period in 2015. And we had the opportunity for an evaluation of the final year of the HOPE project. Now, I suppose instead of just continuing to look at the effectiveness of the programme, because we considered that the programme was effective, that wasn't in question. We thought the evaluation, and Eamon in particular thought, this evaluation should be more about looking at how to sustain those programmes, and also what can we learn from the HOPE programme about social isolation, about engaging people, and often engaging people who were perhaps reluctant to engage. So what factors influenced older people's uptake and engagement with services? And what can we learn from this project about social isolation and how we connect individuals to their communities? It was a small-scale evaluation, so there are lots of things in it that we would like to have done that we just didn't have opportunity to do. I think one of those was to look at the impact on the housing associations themselves, and we didn't really have the opportunity to do that. We also engaged, I suppose, small numbers of people, and again, if there had been more time and resource, it would have been interesting to look at a much wider group of people. So what I'm going to do now is say a little bit about how we conducted the evaluation, and then a little bit about what we found. I suppose with all of these things, you start by thinking what is already known about social isolation and loneliness, and what are the current policies and guidelines in Northern Ireland. And so We engaged with a colleague, Robert Hagan, who's going to be speaking with you later, because I think he had done some of this work for his PhD, and he conducted a literature review, which you will find in the report. And from that, then, we had a better sense of what is the big picture and how can our evaluation fit into that. An important part of the evaluation was to speak with, I suppose, the experts. So who were the experts in this setting? I mean, it was the older people themselves and also the staff who were working with the older people. And in particular, Stephen and Eilish, who were the development officers who had worked for years engaging with isolated older people and trying to bring them along. And so we were very keen to speak with them and say, what is your wisdom? How does this work? And that was really important. So we conducted those 2 interviews with experts. We also then, from that, interviewed what's called focus groups. And again, trying to get a sense of what is your experience of this focus group? Why did you come along? What made it easy to come along? What made it more difficult? What has enabled you to stay in the focus group? What difference does it make to your day-to-day life? Following that, then, we interviewed 5 older people. We tried to get a mix of older people who were very engaged in the project. I think there were maybe 2 people who were very engaged in the project and 3 people who weren't engaged. So we asked them the questions, what has prevented you from coming along to this project? What is it? What are the barriers? What has stopped you getting involved? And then, of course, with those people that are engaged, it's about what has enabled you to come in the first place and to stay. And say, small-scale project, but some really useful insights into the process of engaging people who are isolated and lonely. So what did we find out? Well, we looked at the enablers to participation. So these are the factors from this study that we think that works best in engaging people in these activities. We looked at what are the barriers to engaging people in these activities. We looked at what are alternatives. If going to Hub isn't going to be an option for you, what are the other things that help? And then we talked about what would sustain it. What will help? The project has now ended. So what can we build into the project? The hubs continue, but the Hope project has ended. And so it's looking at what can we build into the project to enable it to continue without the formal help. So as I say, we'll look at this in more detail later, but essentially I'm just going to summarise it. What helps enablers to participation? I suppose you could, if I asked you that question, you could probably give me the answer anyway. Relationship was key. So the thought of doing a leaflet drop or just putting up a notice wasn't going to work. The role of the development officer was absolutely pivotal in engaging with older people, developing a relationship with them and getting them along to the hubs. That required an investment of time, which was often quite significant. And also personal contact in the hubs was important. So actually knowing someone that was already there or being invited by someone that was already there was also key. And then we also looked at what helped people to actually stay in the hub, not just get there for the first week, but actually remain there. And I suppose, again, it would be obvious, it's about relationship. It's about making connections in the hub, actually feeling welcome, and particularly getting involved. So not being a passive participant and observer, but actually having a role and responsibility was really important in enabling people to stay. And again, the Commissioner has made some reference to it, acknowledging gender difference, so that, men might say that activities need to be suited to them as well as to women, and so some thought was given to that. So we also talked about what hindered. So maybe those people who didn't come along, or we spoke to the development officers and said, what is it about those individuals that just will not engage in the hubs? Sometimes it was personal choice, and the thinking was that some individuals all their life were just not joiners, and that wasn't going to change. Their personality wasn't going to change because they reached a certain age. And sometimes it was about characteristics of the older person. So maybe aspects of their life, like, their confidence had gone. They had had a bereavement. They were finding it difficult to go out the house. So there were things about their own personal circumstances that made it difficult to get engaged. In addition to factors for the individual, there were factors for the hub. So there were some things about the hub that maybe made it more difficult to stay. And essentially, I suppose it reflects back to what was said earlier. It was about relationship. It was about people not going and kind of feeling, everybody knows each other there. They're all confident, they're all involved. I still feel a bit of an outsider. And so that was seen as a barrier. And timing was important, early intervention. So, for example, said already about, periods of transition, key moments in people's lives, and it's important to engage them at that stage. Alternatives to hubs. As part of this project, there was a lot of one-to-one engagement, particularly with the development officers. And there was a sense that for some people, regardless of the support and encouragement and engagement that they had, group activity just wasn't suiting them. And so the alternative for them was individual one-to-one support. And that's an important finding, I think. Okay, nearly there. We talked about sustainability. What would sustain these projects after the HOPE kind of structures had ended? And it was about building sustainability early in the project. So almost right from the very beginning, thinking about how can we create a group here that is self-managing and will keep going. Training was important about understanding how to build sustainability, and having strong leadership structures was important. Barriers to sustainability, so the things that people said, this is, it's difficult to keep going. One, because the development officer was so helpful to us that we find it difficult to manage without them. And secondly, we had funding. We were, I suppose, dependent on that funding. It was useful, and we're finding it difficult to manage without it. I'm not going to say very much about the recommendations. I think Eamon's going to, they're just summarised up there, but Eamon's going to talk about them later. As I say, it's a small scale. We can't say it's representative of the whole community, but we spoke with people who were very engaged and very experienced in this whole field. And I think their voice in this has been very important. So, thank you.